Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today. What we wanted to talk about today was how we get smart with data as a country. We're just following up a fantastic session on open banking, and there's a lot of optimism, I think, at the end of that session, thinking about where we're going next with open banking. And that's what we're going to cover today as we think about the transition from open banking to open finance and smart data. Here on the panel with me, I'd like to introduce my fellow guests. We've got Adam Jackson, the Director of Policy at Innovate Finance, Vivienne Artz, the Chair of IBDE, Duncan Stevens, CEO of Gretel, and Liz Brandt, CEO of Ctrl-Shift. Now, before we dive into some of the benefits and use cases of smart data and open data, I appreciate that inherently smart data is a really complex and nuanced topic. So I wanted to do a quick whip around of the panel to get your views of what do you interpret smart data as and where do you see the biggest benefit? Adam, I'll start with you and go along.
I suppose at the core for me, smart data is about the consumer being able to share data on them, their data that's held by other organisations, with their consent to share it with other parties who can then create additional value. I think you can look at open banking, therefore, as a smart data scheme. Open finance is potentially another smart data application. And I think the other thing to think about is that there is then a smart data economy, which is, if you like, the sum of the parts of multiple smart data schemes. And that's when you can then really start sharing different types of data to create value.
Thank you. I don't disagree with you at all, but I think one of the interesting things about smart data is that our understanding of it is evolving. So we're moving from big data to smart data. Big data is great, but it's all there, the good stuff and the bad stuff. It's incredibly difficult to use effectively, to derive value, to derive the necessary insights. And I think when we're thinking about smart data, particularly as it's articulated in our draft legislation, we're seeing it as data that is portable, data that from which we can derive better value, data that is much more insightful. So it is data which we can apply effectively with economic and personal effect. That is smart data, but have we got there yet? I would say no, but we're definitely on that journey.
I'm tempted to look at this through two different lenses. From a consumer perspective, this is about empowering people to own their own data and to use that to empower themselves to get better services. I think from an industry perspective, it's about personalization. It's about creating products and services that really work for people, that generate value for them in a way that we're not able to do today.
Great, now what can I add to that then? So, exactly, I mean, smart data is a form of data portability. It's something that we, as the UK, are not alone on the world map on. It is an international phenomena, and the value opportunity is in one sense simple. Two component parts: productivity and efficiency, which when we did our work with the DCMS back in 2018 was valued at 27.8 billion for the UK economy, and then growth through innovation, through the use of that data, as people talked about, to actually enable and empower individuals. But by doing that, creating new value, enabling you to be more relevant in their lives, personalisation of services, innovative new services that help people make better decisions.
Really comprehensive definitions there, and I think that really encapsulates the beauty of smart data as a concept and the potential for where smart data as an economic construct has to go, which is why we're all here and why it's such an exciting topic. Over the past few days, there's been a lot of discussions around smart data, around open banking and open finance. Yesterday, Bir Mafalani made some really fantastic announcements around the CFIT task force and how CFIT will be driving forward some of the smart data use cases. We also heard from Marion King earlier today around, and the panel just before this, around the next steps to progress open banking into a commercial model. So that's a lot of moving parts and a lot of complexity that we have in the UK at the moment. I'd be interested in the views, and Liz, maybe we can start with you in terms of how you see the interplay between open banking, open finance, and a smart data economy. All one of the same, or three distinct propositions?
Okay, it's an interesting question. Thank you very much for starting with me rather than me having to tail end everything. But one of the things that I find worrying is when I engage with the market, and a lot of people that you engage with around this are in the finance sector, because they've already grokked that this is going on, whereas other sectors are a little bit further behind. But a lot of people that I engage with say, well, we've talked about it inside the organisation, we can't get past open banking, and indeed we can't get past payments. So really, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. And I think the worry for me is that we get stuck in payments and banking, and it doesn't escape into the rest of our economy, while the rest of the world is escaping into our economy. And do not be lulled into any false sense of security that banking can hold this back. Last month, the GAFA, or whatever they're called now, what's the shortening for them anyway, Alphabet, ByteDance, Meta, etc., opened up their APIs in Europe. Okay? This is their data. Their data is opened up now. That data is enormous, and the opportunity to go out there with that data and capture your customers is there. Okay? Do not be lulled into a false sense of security that this is all about payments, this is all about pensions. This is about your customer, and you have to compete.
I think you touched on a few interesting points there, Liz, in terms of, I raised three of the topics that are quite intertwined in this space in terms of open banking, open finance, and smart data. But then also, if you look at digital ID, you look at the role of big tech in the economy, you look at artificial intelligence. There's a whole range of additional contributing factors that are affecting this ecosystem as well, and it's all very much an intertwined ecosystem. Adam, I know at Innovate Finance you do a lot of work around all three of those topics and some of the feeding initiatives to those topics. Do you want to touch on those three as well?
Yeah, I guess. So my I guess use case or example that starts to piece together how those fit together would be if you can imagine buying a house in, I don't know, let's be ambitious and say 5 years' time. And for a start, you want to work out, you've got to save. So having open finance that enables you to move your savings, maybe automatically scrape some savings off maybe when you make a purchase. I was talking to one of our founders the other day. When you're buying something, you might want to put 5% into a savings pot as well. So build up your savings. You then need to get a mortgage, and you might do that with a partner. And again, with open finance, being able to combine your data to enable a better credit decision and drawing on non-financial data as well, maybe behavioral data that makes it easier to get a mortgage. You then need to do you found your property, you're going to do your conveyancing, using data that automatically pulls what the energy consumption of that building is, whether it's liable to flooding, etc. The whole conveyancing thing, at the moment you spend a fortune on lawyers. Apologies, yesterday I was attacking lawyers as well, but if there are any lawyers, but that search function can be done in an automated way, and then you get to the exchange, and where at the moment, you've got a little bit of risk of you waiting. I bought a house, and the people selling it were still in the house at the point at which we were exchanging and we were making the payment. And thankfully, I had a really good lawyer who immediately put a hold. But with a blockchain-based smart contract, drawing on the data, you can then synchronize the legal transfer with land registry and the payment. So again, pulling all those together. And then finally, you need insurance. You could also synchronize insuring the house at the same time. And based on all of your data, knowing what assets you've got and what actually the insurable risk is and how best to do it. So I think that's kind of how you start to see different bits of the economy or your life joining up, and how maybe individual building blocks can then come together.
I mean, it sounds fantastic, and I'm an eternal optimist, and I kind of want to respond to that, Adam, by saying, well, why aren't we there yet? What's stopping us? But Vivienne, I maybe pass this on to you now in terms of what is stopping us? When we talk about some of the risks and the barriers to enabling a smart data economy, what do you think are the most pertinent risks to be considered, and what are the barriers that we're facing?
Sure. I just love the way, Adam, you brought that entirely to life, and you actually demonstrated what smart data can be and what it really should be. But in order to get there, I think we need to think about the whole of the broader ecosystem. So I can only get that information if I am properly connected. And the challenge is that we still have far too many businesses and geographies within the UK, and they're not just rural, they're also here in London, where we do not have the appropriate connectivity. We don't have the broadband speeds that we need. And that is a huge issue. We need to find a solution that perhaps isn't just fiber, but it's satellite and other things as well. We need to be fully inclusive and close that final 20% gap so that actually everyone can access at speed with reliability, not ad hoc on an occasional basis, that important data which is being transformed into accessible mechanisms that we can actually use. It's no longer stuck in paper and stuck in files and you've got to email somebody for them to send it over, but actually you can dynamically go in and access it. So we covered a number of these areas of potential friction in the FinTech to Ubiquitech report, which Ruth Wandoffer coordinated amongst a number of authors, and the Lord Mayor supported, and sort of found 5 things. That networking piece and the connectivity is super, super important. But the other one is really around cybersecurity and fraud. And as we know, absolutely shocking data point, 40% of all crime is fraud. And what does that do for consumer confidence? What does that do every time you go online, every time you want to share your financial details and you want to share information? I mean, my background is as a privacy expert. I'm very cautious about how I share data because the risks are apparently so high. So we really have to focus on bringing down that cybersecurity risk and creating greater trust in terms of those absolutely core transactions. So that part of it is super, super important for us to address. The other piece is around verification and identification. Fakes are going crazy. They're so incredibly credible. I was just speaking to my mum on the phone, and she was so embarrassed because she got completely and utterly scammed, bank account cleaned out. But it was so credible. She was expecting to hear from a particular vendor. She logged onto her bank account, and the information was shared, and particularly with the older generation, it is really, really difficult to differentiate what is credible and what isn't. And we need that verification not just for individuals, but we also need it for legal entities, and we need it for assets. There's so much fake stuff out there. Until we start dealing with the fakes and enable a verification, a trusted way going forward, again, that will be a challenge. 2 more things. Digital skills. What are we doing about upskilling? And it isn't just about the youngsters. It's about reskilling those in the market who are going to be disintermediated by AI, by innovation. How are we reintegrating them into this space? And then the big one, which doesn't get a lot of attention, but did get mentioned earlier today, is digital trade. And we've made some tremendous headway, I think, particularly with the Electronic Trade Documents Act, where actually digital trade is how we keep going. Digital trade needs to be simpler, easier, and the legislation in the UK, again, not much fanfare, but big, big bonus, and that needs to be replicated elsewhere because most trade documentation is conducted under English law. And if we can digitalize that, we can actually create a hub for trade and a trusted mechanism for trade, which is essential to sustaining our economy.
I mean, there's a whole range of different topics there, but one that I'd like to dwell on a little bit more is around some of the demographic challenges that we have and the topic of financial exclusion and digital exclusion. Duncan, that's essentially the raison d'etre of what you do at Gretel. Do you want to maybe share with the audience what you do at Gretel for those who don't know, and how you're working to address some of the challenges that Vivienne just raised?
Sure, thank you for that. That was the one point I was going to kind of build on actually with what Vivienne said. It's really comprehensive, but for us, the idea is about just being financially inclusive, creating products that drive real value for users of all kinds. You can try and educate people as much as possible, build digital skills, but if you don't create products which are accessible and simple, then it's going to fall short. And we've done that with Gretel. So for those of you who don't know who we are, why don't you know? Go and register with us. So we're a free service for the public. We help people find and reconnect with 28 million lost financial products, about £90 billion worth of money sat there. Most of the people sat in kind of banking, most of the money sat in pensions for understandable reasons. But we've built that around building inclusively. You know, we've designed it to work for people at opposite ends of the spectrum, really very old people who have retired, younger people who are just coming into the kind of credit market for the first time. And we've done it that way so you can lower the barrier of entry, still be very secure in what you do. You know, security is absolutely critical. Fakes are a real issue for 100% sure, but you know, create a product which is accessible, simple to use, and generates a real value proposition for the customer.
Just also touching on your point about digital identity, and I'm lucky enough to sit in some of the groups talking about standards around digital identity. It's my favourite thing to do, not. However, what I think is very, very concerning for me is that the standards bodies that are dealing with this, the people that hold the pen are Meta, Alphabet, etc. It is not the big commercial entities. They are driving this to drive their own competitive position. We have to stand up to be counted. Don't bury this thing in it's all about payments, or it's all about this, that, and the other. It's some time out in the future. It needs to be designed for all of us now. Otherwise, everybody will lose their competitive advantage. And we won't be able to run effectively services like Gretel, which are incredibly important for huge numbers of people across this country and across multiple countries. So there are some key component parts that really, really people need to pay attention to. That said, I don't want people to sit there and think, oh, hang on a second, I'll wait until that digital ID thing's done, and I'll wait until that privacy thing's done, and I'll wait until the trade thing's done. What I love about this country is I see entrepreneurs everywhere, intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs taking this up and running with it and building value today, despite some of the challenges, and managing through those challenges. And you can rely on a lot of this being addressed and move forward. But what I love is the fact that open banking has created a community of people who can do that together. And that's one of the major advantages that we have. So on one hand, I say, don't think it's all about open banking. And on the other hand, I go, let's all get together to actually move this forward, because that ecosystem of players is absolutely critical to build that value and move today.
So Liz, I think one of the points you brought up earlier was actually about the accessibility of data that is increasingly being mandated through legislation. It has had to be mandated through legislation because there are a number of incumbents that control significant amounts of data, far more so than the financial services sector. I mean, everyone thinks the financial services sector has got, more data than anyone else. They absolutely don't. But access to that data will help create that level playing field. And I couldn't agree with you more about the standards piece. We all need to be engaged on the standards piece so that we set standards that are neutral, that we set standards that are accountable, that we set standards that are transparent and that can be trusted. The thing I love about standards is that they are jurisdiction neutral. We have an increasingly complex array of data laws out there in the world. 3/4 of the world now has privacy legislation which focuses on personal data. We've had a monumental increase in the manifestation of localization provisions and so on and so forth, but the data has to flow and it will continue to flow. And the way in which we can ensure that it flows in a trusted way is through getting together and making sure that we put in place those data standards, standards that allow access to data, standards that secure data, and standards that create that level playing field so that SMEs can have access to the data, not just the big giants.
Are you making a pitch to come and join in on the digital identity standards panels? I do. You'll have a lovely time.
Well, I have to say I'm more about digital verification. There isn't a single standard or an identity.
No,
Who wants
true,
an
true,
identity?
true.
It's about that. How do I verify? How do I verify
Okay,
that
you're
it's
in.
you?
You're in.
Yeah, okay, I'm in. Fabulous. New job.
Very good, very good. We've talked a lot about some of the interesting use cases around smarter and some of smart data and some of the challenges to get there. We've already just in the last couple of minutes raised a number of different pathways that the UK can feasibly take to get there. We talked around, Vivienne talked about starting with standards, and Liz talked about starting with open banking as one of the initial building blocks, or alternatively, potentially kind of big tech initiating the momentum and the drive towards open data and smart data. A shameless plug now. Just yesterday, KPMG, in conjunction with Innovate Finance, published a paper talking just on this topic, talking about the different pathways of how the UK can realise the vision of an open finance economy. Adam, a few suggestions already from the panel in terms of standards-based, using open banking as a building block. What are your views on some of the different pathways and the pros and cons of each?
And I think, actually, as Liz and Vivienne have illustrated, in a way, standards will be developed in different models. One of the questions is, who sets the standards? Is it Amazon that sets the standards and runs the platform? Or is it something like a kind of Swift, where you've got arguably a kind of industry representation and involvement? In our paper, we kind of put 3 provocations out of ways of getting there, and they were scenarios, and it's important to say scenarios are not recommendations, and they're also never going to be what actually happens, but as a prompt for thinking about some of the benefits and some of the trade-offs. So we identified you can go for the big bang. Vivienne, you mentioned just in Europe, firms are required to now provide access to data. But if that's just based on a legal requirement, and we might have that with the DPDI bill that's going through, if it was then extended to all industries, I think without additional schemes or mechanisms, you probably end up with some big dominant players that set the standards and run the platforms off which the ecosystem then has to work. We have the second model, which is kind of the incremental, the swimming lanes. And in a way, we've got that at the moment because we've got open banking. Okay, it sort of splits into 2 lanes, payments and data services. We've got the pensions dashboard, which, if open banking's here, pensions dashboard somewhere over here, kind of doing its own thing. Then we've got initiatives like Project Perseus, which is starting to look at how you automate smart meter data to create emissions trading. So you could just have a number of different schemes developing, and they kind of never really talk to each other. But we start to make progress, and we could easily move from open banking to savings. We've got yesterday, and we've got the first meeting of the CFITS task force today, looking at how we extend open banking to credit. So you can kind of have that incremental approach where you build out. I think the third one is there a bit more of a strategic approach, where you start to focus on what are the long-term big use cases and gains, and also what's needed for interoperability, thinking about verification schemes, maybe consent dashboards, and thinking about how you ensure that those individual sector projects connect and the standards are interoperable between them. That then raises kind of questions of governance. We're back to, ultimately, at the moment we've got a really strong ecosystem in open banking. 300 different firms working with Open Banking Limited. How do we find a model where that times 1,000 in terms of players and even more can be involved in standard setting, can feel that they're treated fairly on a platform? And all of that is about a balance between, I think, regulation, policymakers, public interest, and industry working collaboratively.
I think, thank you, Adam, for that summary. And I think it remains to be seen what balance the UK will take forward in terms of regulatory versus market-driven, the prioritisation of different industries. I think it is clear that it's really exciting and there's an enormous amount of potential there. So to wrap up, I just wanted to, we've got a minute left, a quick one sentence from each of the panel members in terms of what use case or proposition, either for consumers or for businesses, are you most excited about as we move towards a world of smart data? Adam, you can't use the same home ownership use case you started with, so I'll give you time to think and start at the other end.
So I think the one that I am actually most excited about, and maybe this is an age thing, is around health and longevity and how data can help us all stay healthier longer, which is incredibly important for finance sector, incredibly important from an insurance perspective, incredibly important for us socially and economically. And smart data can help us all do that, help us understand what's going on and how we can all stay healthier longer.
Very good. Duncan?
In terms of best use case, I'm tempted to say ours, clearly. I think long-term financial well-being and actually engaging people in financial services really early through the simple portability of data. I think that just making decision-making that much easier for people to have better outcomes in later life.
Very good. Vivienne?
Gosh, you're also virtuous. I think one of the things that I'm really inspired by is reducing the amount of financial crime out there. It is ruining people's lives, and it isn't just an economic crime. Financial crime funds terrible criminal activity that impacts everyone's day-to-day lives. And I think with the ability to share data, to be much more focused, we can make real inroads so that it isn't just about having your bank account emptied or modern slavery and so on and so forth, but we can actually make a difference and stop the scourge that is costing us a lot, both personally and financially. So I'd like to see that happen.
I'll go for a B2B case. Nesta and Department for Business recently ran a competition for use cases around smart data, and there was one on trade credit. If Andrew Churchill's in the room, he was here earlier, Wave, he was one of the finalists. He's not here. But looking at how you use smart data to track supply chains to provide trade finance, but actually then working through data from kind of where, for example, minerals are mined through to the end consumer.
Very good, and I think those 4 use cases there, the diversity and the variety of them really sum up the diversity and potential of smart data as a concept and the potential for smart data for the UK going forward. So I think it's a great note to end on. Thank you very much to the panellists, and thank you to the audience for joining us today.